But we are the same thing. We are potential. And what we are, too, is an individual. And you cannot suppress the power of an individual. It doesn't matter who you are, what color you are, or gender. You can change the world. You really can. I have 2 children. My son is 25. I had him when I was 7. My daughter is 23, very proud of that girl. My children, half Irish, half Puerto Rican, so they dance salsa like this, you know. But we don't talk about that. I have to say that I'm here talking about diversity, and if I am anything, I am like the embodiment of what diversity can do for you. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. Then my parents shanghaied me. I was telling Josette that my senior prom ended at 4:30 in the morning because we party like that. And then at 7:30 in the morning, they had me in a plane coming to Houston because they had moved to Houston the year before. Now, talk about a culture shock. I get to Texas. I don't speak English at all. I have to learn English in Texas, which was difficult because turns out they don't speak English either. You know it's true. They talk funny like that. I love Texas. I went to Texas A&M University. I'm an Aggie. I studied aerospace engineering and psychology because I figure I come in handy someday when we find life in another planet that needs therapy. Yeah, be like, E.T., why won't you call your mother? I worked for NASA. I did. I used to work at the Johnson Space Center in Houston where I was a rocket scientist, but I had to quit because I make mistakes, and apparently that's not allowed. I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to be the first Puerto Rican woman in space. Had it all figured out. You would have known my mission because of the fuzzy dice hanging from the rearview mirror. What I'm seeing is that we're all different. We have like a different perspective on so many things, you know? And I remember always what I heard was the story of the fleas. Well, we're the same. We're like fleas. You know that, right? How many of you have heard of flea circuses? Everybody, right? We have. So you know how you train a flea for a circus is you have to capture the flea, right? And fleas naturally are very limitless creatures. You know, fleas have to jump really high to be able to get on your dog, on your children's clothing or whatever so they can come in the house. Now, when you capture a flea for a circus, what you have to do is you got to put him in a jar. You put him in a jar and you put the lid on the jar. Now, it doesn't matter what size the jar is. That flea, when you first put it in the jar, it's going to, it's going to hit the lid, and you're going to hear it, the tick, 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 and you put it away. A couple of days later, when you pull that jar out, you don't hear the flea hitting the lid anymore. You can take the lid off that jar, and that flea has learned to jump only as high as it needs to jump to not hit the lid. Doesn't matter what size jar that flea is in. So some of them jump this high, some of them jump that high, whatever. What's really interesting is that flea will never, ever, ever, ever jump higher than it learned to jump in those couple of days in that jar. Take it in. And that is how we are. We are just like that. We all have these jars, these conditioning, these limitations, because that's how we learn. You know, when you're a little kid, you reach for the hot stuff and you get hit. You know, don't touch it, don't touch it. Let him touch it one time. You know he won't touch it anymore. But that's how we learn. We learn by limitation. We learn by hitting that lid all the time. And we need to, what I like to do in my talks is I like to remind people, we are not like fleas. Because fleas, you can't reason with them. You can't teach them, but we can. I can tell you, there's no lid on your jar. You know, there's jars about, we all have jars about being a woman, being a man, being a black woman, being a Latino woman, being a whatever. We all have these different conditions. Our culture, our families, everything just really teach us, you know, what our limitations are. And as soon as we break through one of these jars, we will be able to break through any jar. When I first moved to Texas, I was very depressed. I was very sad. I didn't understand what they were saying. Nothing. I would sit there and watch TV. I remember I was laying on the couch in my parents' house for 2 weeks. It's like, wow, I'm watching TV, and you know, my parents kind of left me alone for the very first time in my life, because Latino parents don't leave you alone. They make you work. But they let me be sad for a minute. So I'm sitting there on the sofa and I'm watching TV, and 2 weeks into it, I'm watching The Gong Show. You remember that one. Boy, what an epitome of intelligence. Yeah, there's this huge woman. She was wearing a thong bikini and she was playing a piano. It's impressive. Now, I had no idea what they were saying. And I remember having this thought. I said, you know what? I'm going to learn this language. And I'm going to learn it better than my parents. I'm not going to talk like this like my mom and everybody else. I'm going to learn it without an accent. I just was like angry almost. And I made a decision. And what's interesting is 5 months later, I was speaking English properly, without the accent, unless I want to turn it on. And I realized, oh my God, if I can do that, I can do anything. And then I realized, if I can do anything, anybody can do anything, because I'm certainly not special. I know it sounds like I don't keep a job. I do. I'm very old. You don't know. And then I went into corporate trainings and motivational speaking, stress management trainings. I used to do corporate trainings for people like, Enron, they needed it, and Chevron and Exxon and all those people. I've been out there and doing, and people would come up to me and they would say, you should be a comedian. I'm like, I'm trying to enlighten you. What's your problem? But I heard that so many times that I thought, you know what, there might be something in there. So I finally tried it. And I did my first 5 minutes of comedy, and I have been doing now comedy for 18 years. So I'm about to become an overnight sensation. We do things the way we do them because we've always done them that way. It's like the story of the grandmother, the woman who goes to cook the pork, the roast, and she cuts the end of the roast. Have you heard of that? She cuts the end of the roast, and her husband goes, why do you always cut the end of the roast before you cook it? She was like, because my mom cooked it like that always. So she went to her mother. She did ask her mom. She said, Mom, why do you cut the end of the roast, before you cook it? She said, well, that's because your grandma always did it that way. So she goes to her grandma. She goes, Abuela, why do we cut the roast, like that always? She goes, oh, honey, that's because when I married your grandfather, I just had a little pan like this, so it didn't fit. And it's funny, and it's, we love to hear these stories, but they're true. They're true. All right, that's it. You guys, thank you very much. Fela, thank you for having me out here.